Robin Tudor, founder of Empower Total Health, and this is my fourth report on the 5th International Plant-Based Nutrition Healthcare Conference, the PBNHC, which was held in Anaheim, California in September of 2017. And today I'm going to be covering 4 presentations that focused on cardiovascular disease and its risk factors. The Bitter Truth of Sugar Addiction by Dr. Robert Lustig, Sugar and Heart Disease, What Does the Research Say by Dr. Kim Williams, Prevent and Reverse Heart Disease by Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn, and The Scientific Skinning on Saturated Fat by Dr. Joel Kahn. Now, I must admit that when I saw Dr. Robert Lustig's name on the faculty list for this year's PBNHC, I did a bit of a double take. Kim Williams, Essie, and Joel Kahn are all well-known advocates of a whole food plant-based diet, but Robert Lustig is definitely not. In fact, he's an enthusiastic advocate of a high-fat, animal food-based diet. He firmly believes that saturated fat has been unfairly vilified and points the finger of blame for our current epidemics of obesity and diabetes and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease and heart disease solely at sugar, or more specifically fructose, a component of sucrose or table sugar. I figured we'd be in for a bit of argy-bargy between Lustig and the plant-based doctors, and my prediction turned out to be pretty accurate. Robert Lustig is a pediatric endocrinologist, so he specialises in hormonal disturbances of children, including diabetes, and he's deeply concerned about the health status of America's children. He has good reason to be worried. Childhood obesity rates are at all-time highs, and consequently type 2 diabetes, which used to be called mature onset diabetes because it was only ever seen in older people, well, it's now being diagnosed in preteen children, and that's happening here in Australia as well, not just in the US. Type 2 diabetes is caused by insulin resistance, which also affects the liver, causing non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, or NAFLD. In NAFLD, fat in the form of triglycerides accumulates in liver cells, and this fat blocks the action of insulin, which is the hormone that allows glucose that's in the bloodstream to get into cells in order to be burnt by the cells as fuel. If you have NAFLD, your risk of developing type 2 diabetes is 3.5 times higher than if you don't have NAFLD. And NAFLD is also a major risk factor for cardiovascular events such as heart attacks. To top it all off, NAFLD can progress to cirrhosis of the liver, even in someone who never consumes alcohol. So the findings of a study that Lustig mentioned, in which 17% of obese children who died in car accidents were found on autopsy to have NAFLD, are hugely worrying. The rising tide of obesity-induced type 2 diabetes and NAFLD probably explains the fact that after decades of decline, the rate of death from cardiovascular disease in the US is now rising again. No one would argue with Robert Lustig that we should take obesity, diabetes, and NAFLD in children very seriously. Where the arguments begin is in identifying the culprit or culprits and thus the solution to the problem. Lustig insists that sugar, specifically fructose, is the sole villain. He's written books about this. He makes much of studies showing that fructose is converted to fat in the liver, which seems credible until you actually read the studies and find that in order to make the liver turn fructose into fat, you have to feed obese individuals 104 to 250 grams of fructose per day on top of their normal diet, which equates to an additional 18 to 97% of their usual total daily energy intake, depending on how much they eat. Now, for comparison, an apple or 1 cup of blueberries each contain 10 grams of fructose. So 104 to 250 grams of fructose is a heck of a lot of fructose. Dr. Garth Davis, who spoke the day after Lustig but on a different topic, has amassed the evidence that contradicts Lustig's position into a blog post, which I've linked to in the article that accompanies this video. And it's well worth taking the time to read this post in its entirety. As just one example, the EPIC Norfolk study found that fructose intake was inversely related to diabetes risk. That is, the higher the fructose intake, the lower the risk of diabetes. And furthermore, that replacing 5% of energy intake from saturated fat with an equivalent number of kilojoules from fructose was associated with a 30% lower risk of developing diabetes. Just 5% of saturated fat out of the diet, swap it for fructose and drop your risk of diabetes by a third. Dr. Kim Williams concurred with Lustig that there is convincing evidence that sugar consumption is a risk factor for heart disease, especially in the form of sugar-sweetened beverages such as soft drinks, fruit juice drinks, or cordial. He noted that sugar increases the activity of the sympathetic nervous system, which results in raised blood pressure and insulin resistance, and other known risk factors for cardiovascular disease. However, he took issue, in his characteristically soft-spoken, gentlemanly fashion, with Lustig's sole emphasis on sugar. While Lustig argued that triglycerides, which are raised by consumption of refined carbohydrates, including sugar, are a better predictor of cardiovascular risk than LDL levels, so-called bad cholesterol, Williams countered that the combination of high LDL, high bad cholesterol, with a raised C-reactive protein, or CRP, which is a marker of inflammation. That combo, high LDL, high CRP, is associated with the highest risk of death from cardiovascular causes. And CRP, along with other inflammatory markers, has been consistently found to be lower in plant-based eaters. Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn also acknowledges the crucial role played by inflammation in coronary heart disease. In fact, he contends that the low-fat, plant-based diet that he prescribes to open up the clogged arteries of his cardiac crippled patients and eliminate their angina within a couple of weeks and protect them against future cardiovascular events with a close to 100% success rate, he argues that it works primarily through its anti-inflammatory effects. The number of anti-inflammatory compounds in whole, minimally processed plant foods are just too numerous to count. But Esselstyn highlighted recent findings that a compound called 3,3-dimethyl-1-butanol, DMB, that's not in the text, inhibits the formation of TMO, trimethylamine, which is converted by gut bacteria into artery-toxic TMAO, trimethylamine oxide, although not in vegans, because in vegans, the gut bacteria that convert the TMA into the artery-damaging TMAO don't exist. So where would we get this magic DMB? It's found in red grapes and therefore in the balsamic vinegar that Essie instructs his patients to anoint their green leafy vegetables with and to eat 6 portions of this combination per day, 6 fist-sized portions per day. I actually think it's a pretty tasty prescription for heart health myself. I'm very partial to balsamic vinegar on kale. Dr. Joel Kahn was clearly exasperated with Lustig's insistence that sugar and not saturated fat is the villain in heart disease. Kahn has systematically countered the claims by the sat-fat denialists in a number of posts, which again I've linked to in the article that accompanies this video. And so has David Katz. And for a mind-bendingly thorough examination of the saturated fat heart disease link, you simply can't go past Plant Positive's video series, which is also comprehensively referenced and linked to in the article that accompanies this video. Kahn also shot down Lustig's claim that HDL, not LDL, was the most important cholesterol subfraction and that a high HDL is protective against heart disease. He pointed out that drugs that raise HDL actually double the risk of a cardiovascular event. And there's a couple of drug companies that have spent a lot of money developing these HDL raising drugs, and it's been a complete disaster because it works great at raising HDL, it's just that the patients die more. Esselstyn agrees with Kahn. He cites evidence that the total amount of HDL cholesterol really bears no relation to what's called its efflux capacity. That is, the ability of HDL to remove cholesterol from arterial plaque and shuttle it off to the liver for excretion out of the body. He points out that the Tarahumara Indians of Mexico, the ones who were written about in Christopher McDougall's fabulous book, Born to Run. These Tarahumara have an astonishingly low HDL level. They average 32 milligrams per deciliter in the American measures, or 0.08 millimoles per litre in Australian measures. And yet heart disease is virtually unknown amongst these people. So let's cut to the chase. The only diet which has ever been shown to reverse heart disease, even in cases so severe that bypass surgery has been scheduled, is a low-fat, plant-based diet. This is the diet that Esselstyn prescribes, along with Dr. Dean Ornish, whose heart disease reversal program is funded by US Medicare because it works, and it saves Medicare a lot of money by slashing the number of angioplasties and bypasses that have to be performed on heart patients, not to mention the pharmaceutical bill. This diet style is low in fat, particularly saturated fat, and it's high in unrefined carbohydrates, and it does include some fructose in the form of fruit. Given that Robert Lustig has never treated people with coronary heart disease, while all the plant-based doctors who argued against him actually do that for a living and can document the results of a low-fat plant-based diet in their patients, I'd be inclined to take any advice that Lustig gives on preventing heart disease with a grain of salt. Or maybe not, given the role of sodium in promoting heart disease. It's not that any of these plant-based doctors think that eating sugar is a good idea, and let's be clear about that. All of them advocate for a diet that is low in any kind of refined carbohydrate, including sugar. But the epidemiological, the mechanistic, and the clinical evidence linking saturated fat intake to cardiovascular disease is just so strong, so monolithic, that it can't be dismissed, at least by anyone with any intellectual integrity. So look, this is a really important issue. Cardiovascular disease between stroke and heart attack is still the leading cause of death in Australians and in Americans. So please do like this video, share it on your social media networks, put your comments below, and I will catch up with you for next week's weekly update.